Emily pushed open the glass door of the restaurant, its smooth motion feeling almost too deliberate. She stepped into the dimly lit interior, her eyes immediately scanning the trendy space. The restaurant buzzed with conversations, the clink of silverware and the soft hum of background music creating an atmosphere of casual elegance. The air smelled faintly of garlic and fresh herbs. Despite the warm lighting and the friendly chatter that filled the room, a sense of tension coiled tight in her chest. The place was perfect, just the kind of spot where she imagined a first date would unfold. Yet, something felt deeply wrong. She adjusted her coat, her palms slick with the faintest layer of sweat, and moved past the elegant, white-clothed tables. Her eyes flicked over the crowd as if searching for a familiar face among the strangers. Then she saw him. Kyle sat at a small, two-person table toward the back, dressed casually yet impeccably. His gaze lifted from his phone the moment he spotted her, and a smile spread across his face. It was the smile she had come to expect after weeks of talking, of sharing snippets of their lives. He was exactly the man she had chatted with online, confident, easygoing, and charismatic. But there was something in his eyes, something fleeting, almost imperceptible, that made Emily hesitate. She forced a smile, though it felt stiff on her face. With a small breath, she walked toward him, her heels clicking softly against the floor. As she neared, her steps slowed, her senses sharpening. He was still smiling, but now she was certain, there was a subtle shift in the air. Something was off. Kyle stood up as she reached the table, extending a hand. "Emily," he said, his voice warm, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Of course," she replied, shaking his hand. Her fingers lingered a moment too long, his grip firm, but not too much so. They both sat, and for a moment, the world outside of their small corner of the restaurant seemed to fall away. Kyle leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers as he started talking about his day, his voice smooth and steady, each word flowing effortlessly. Emily nodded, trying to keep her attention on him, but her gaze drifted. She shifted in her seat, trying to make herself comfortable. As she adjusted, her eyes caught something out of the corner of her vision. A slight gleam from Kyle's jacket pocket. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable in the low light, but it was there. Something metallic. Her stomach lurched. Her breath hitched. Emily leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make out the object. A flash of recognition slammed into her, a camera lens. She could see it now, just barely poking out of the pocket. Her heart dropped into her stomach. A camera. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she tried to keep her composure. She tore her gaze away, but the image of the lens stayed with her, burning into her thoughts. Kyle continued talking, oblivious, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the conversation. She could hear his words, but they felt muffled, distant. Her thoughts raced as she tried to push down the growing sense of unease. Why was there a camera? Was it some kind of joke? Maybe it was a mistake, maybe he hadn't even realized it was visible. But somehow, that didn't seem likely. She forced herself to refocus, to catch up with the conversation, but it was hard. Kyle's smile, his laughter, it all felt too practiced, too smooth. He was charming, no doubt, but there was an unsettling undercurrent to it all. The waiter came by, taking their drink orders, and Emily took the opportunity to glance around. The restaurant was busy, but no one seemed to be paying attention to her or Kyle. Just another couple, sitting in a trendy spot, having dinner. But in the pit of her stomach, the knot of anxiety tightened. Kyle launched into a story about a recent trip to the beach, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke. His laugh was easy, his eyes bright, but there was something about his words that didn't sit right with Emily. The phrases seemed rehearsed, like lines he had delivered 1,000 times before. Capturing the perfect moments, he said, leaning back in his chair with a wide grin. That's what life's all about, don't you think? His gaze shifted to her, and she caught the gleam in his eyes. Emily froze for a second, the words hanging in the air. Capturing the perfect moments. She wasn't sure why, but the phrase hit her like a slap. Was this about their date? Was he talking about her? She felt a chill creep down her spine. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. Something was wrong. But what? Perfect moments, she muttered, almost to herself. Kyle grinned, oblivious. Yeah, just like this one, he said, clearly enjoying the moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily's mind raced, torn between the surface charm and the creeping feeling that she was being toyed with. It didn't take long for the words she had been circling to fall into place. Kyle was filming her. This wasn't a date, it was a performance. Her stomach churned as she finally gave voice to the thought that had been building inside her. Kyle, she said, her voice steady, though she could feel the tension starting to fray the edges of her calm. Is that a camera in your pocket? Kyle's smile faltered, just a fraction of a second, too quick to be anything but instinctive. But it was enough. Emily saw it. His eyes darted down to his pocket, his fingers twitching in the slightest motion, a subtle attempt to cover up the lens. Oh, don't worry about that, Kyle said, his voice light and easy. It's just for a little prank video. You know, capturing our perfect moments on camera. Emily's stomach sank. Her pulse thundered in her ears. A prank video, she repeated, disbelief lacing her tone. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the table. She wasn't sure if she was more angry or unsettled. Kyle chuckled, brushing it off. Yeah, it's just a harmless joke, nothing big. I figured you'd be cool with it. He gave her that same, wide smile, the kind he used when everything was supposed to be fine, when the game was supposed to be over. But Emily wasn't buying it. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. I didn't know this was part of the date. Kyle's face twitched, and for a second, Emily thought she saw a flash of something darker behind his eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. It's no big deal, really, he insisted, waving a hand dismissively. It's all in good fun. No need to make a big deal out of it. He readjusted the camera in his pocket, trying to subtly cover it, but Emily wasn't fooled. Her unease deepened, and a sense of violation washed over her. This wasn't what she'd signed up for. She glanced down at the lens, and then back at him, the anxiety clawing at her throat. I don't like being filmed without my consent, Emily said, her voice steady, though the anger simmered just beneath the surface. This isn't funny, Kyle. What's the real reason you're doing this? Kyle shifted in his seat, his grin faltering. You're overreacting, he said, his tone suddenly defensive. It's just a prank. You're thinking too much into it. No, Emily snapped, her patience finally wearing thin. I want to see the footage. Right now. Kyle's gaze flickered for a moment, his facade cracking. He hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the table. For the first time, Emily saw him falter. The easy confidence was gone. He wasn't the same man she had been chatting with for weeks. He was hiding something far darker than just a prank. I'll turn it off now, Kyle mumbled, his voice tight. But his hands lingered over the camera, his movements slow, deliberate. Emily's instincts screamed at her. This wasn't just a prank. Kyle wasn't who he said he was, and whatever game he was playing, she was just another pawn in it. The realization hit her with force. She didn't know how she had gotten here, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't leaving this table until she got answers. Emily's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as she stood frozen at the edge of the restaurant. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, trembling from a fury she could barely control. The reality of the situation hit her in waves, the rising tide of anger crashing against her chest. She had been manipulated, humiliated, and now she was standing here, on the precipice of something far worse than a simple date gone wrong. Her mind spun with disbelief, trying to process what had just happened, what Kyle had done. The restaurant's noise faded into the background, the clink of glasses and hum of conversation lost to the roar in her ears. She could still see Kyle sitting there, his smug expression, his calm demeanor, as though nothing was wrong. Her eyes locked onto his, and the weight of his indifference only made her rage grow. "I want to see the footage. Now," she demanded, her voice shaking with frustration. The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted the slight tremble in her tone. She forced herself to stand tall, not wanting him to see how much he had rattled her. She wanted to scream, to slap the smirk off his face, but she knew if she gave in to that anger now, she would lose. Kyle leaned back in his chair, his fingers casually drumming the edge of the table. He didn't even flinch at her words, like he had been expecting them. His eyes glinted with amusement, and he chuckled, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice light, as if it was all just a minor misunderstanding. "It's nothing, really." The dismissive tone in his voice hit her like a slap, and her blood boiled at the audacity of his nonchalant dismissal. He wasn't even trying to understand what was wrong. He wasn't trying to explain. He wasn't sorry. No, this was something more. He was enjoying this. His control over her, over this entire situation, was all too clear. It was a game to him, and she was just another player. His words made her stomach churn with disgust. "It's just a prank, Emily," he continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Seriously, relax. No one's going to see it. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Her teeth clenched, and the walls of the restaurant seemed to close in. She felt small, humiliated by the growing realization that he wasn't going to take her seriously. He didn't care. He was making a joke out of her. As the seconds dragged on, her anger began to twist into something deeper, more visceral. It wasn't just the camera, the prank, or the manipulation, it was how easily Kyle had spun the situation in his favor, turning her into the problem. He was gaslighting her, twisting her reality to make her feel like the one who was overreacting. Emily stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Her mind raced, caught in the whirlwind of anger and disbelief. She glanced around at the other tables, searching for some kind of validation, hoping someone would notice, would step in, but the people around her continued their conversations as though nothing was wrong. No one noticed her discomfort, no one saw what was happening. The world continued to spin while she stood there, trapped in this moment with Kyle. She could feel the eyes of the room on her. Even if they didn't know the full story, she was sure they could see the tension, the discomfort, the raw fury in her expression. She wasn't sure if they saw it as a harmless joke, or if they recognized the fear beginning to creep into her features, but either way, Emily felt the weight of their indifference. She was alone in this. Kyle's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "You're just being dramatic," he said, shifting in his seat, the smug smile never leaving his face. "It's not like anyone's going to care. I mean, it's just a funny video, right? Everyone's going to laugh, including you. You'll see." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. The way he spoke to her, the mocking tone, as if she were just another person to entertain. It wasn't about a prank, it was about control. Kyle was playing a game, and she was the unwitting pawn. She could feel his manipulation crawling under her skin, the way he tried to make her feel small, to make her feel foolish for not going along with his sick joke. She felt the anger bubbling inside her, threatening to boil over. She could feel her hands shaking, the sting of humiliation creeping up her spine. She wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not this time. Without thinking, she grabbed her purse, her movements sharp, jerky with the pent-up frustration she could no longer contain. "I'm done," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper, but the edge of it was clear. She couldn't stay another second. Not with him. Not in this place. She turned, her heart pounding as she made for the door, determined to escape, to regain control over the situation before she lost herself completely. But then, just as she was about to reach the door, she felt it. His presence. Kyle stood up quickly, his face hardening as he blocked her path. His expression was no longer playful, no longer carefree. Now, it was something darker. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of menace flashing in his gaze. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice had shifted, no longer light, but laden with a subtle threat that made Emily freeze in her tracks. Her heart raced, every instinct in her body screaming at her to get out, to run. But Kyle wasn't letting her go. Not now. She stepped back instinctively, a small step toward the door. "Let me go, Kyle," she said, her voice quivering slightly with the beginnings of panic. But Kyle was faster. In an instant, his hand shot out, gripping her arm with a vice-like force. The pressure was enough to make her flinch, but it wasn't the physical pain that made her freeze. It was the sudden, suffocating realization of what was happening, what he was doing. He wasn't just playing a prank anymore. This was something worse. "Don't be like that," Kyle said, his grip tightening, his eyes cold. "You can't just leave like this. We're not finished." Emily's pulse spiked as she tried to yank her arm free, her breath coming faster, more shallow. Panic surged through her veins. She was trapped. His grip was like iron, and the strength in his hand seemed to match the coldness in his eyes. "Let go of me," she hissed, her voice sharp with panic. Her mind screamed at her to break free, but the harder she tried to pull away, the tighter his grip became. The restaurant, once full of noise, now seemed eerily quiet, as though the world had closed in on her. All she could hear was the frantic beating of her heart. In a flash, something inside Emily snapped. The fear turned to fury, a surge of adrenaline flooding her system. Without thinking, she shoved him. Hard. Her palm connected with his chest, sending him stumbling back in surprise. "What the hell?" he shouted, his voice rising in anger as he staggered. He hadn't expected that. Emily didn't wait for him to recover. She turned and bolted toward the exit, her feet pounding against the floor. She could feel the cold air hit her face as she pushed through the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't look back. She was free. For now. Outside, Emily's hands shook uncontrollably as she pulled out her phone, dialing the police. Her fingers trembled as she tried to explain what had happened, describing Kyle's hidden camera, his manipulation, and the physical restraint he had placed on her. She could barely focus on the words, her mind still racing with the disbelief of what had just transpired. She felt exposed, violated, her sense of safety shattered. The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way, but Emily could feel the paranoia creeping in. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Kyle following her, his smirk still painted across his face. But he wasn't there. Not yet. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she froze. A notification. The blood drained from her face as she saw the headline, "First Date Gone Wrong." She clicked the link, and her stomach churned. The video was already trending, and there it was, her face twisted in fury, her voice shaking as she confronted Kyle. And then, there was Kyle's voice, cool and mocking in the background. She didn't take the joke well. "This is what happens when you date people who can't handle a little fun," he said, the sarcasm thick in his tone. The video played over and over again, showing her, Emily, as the hysterical one, the one who couldn't take a joke, the one who ruined everything. Her heart sank as she scrolled through the comments. "She's crazy," one person wrote. "What a psycho," said another. The video was everywhere now, the laughing emojis, the ridicule, the insults, all piling on top of her. Her chest tightened as the weight of the humiliation set in. Kyle had twisted everything. He had taken her most vulnerable moment, the one where she was simply trying to protect herself, and turned it into a spectacle. The betrayal hit harder than anything she'd ever felt. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Kyle. "Don't worry, Emily. You'll be famous now. Everyone will know you as the girl who couldn't take a joke. You should be thanking me." The coldness that washed over her wasn't just from the message. It was the realization that this wasn't just a prank. It was a calculated move. Kyle had been planning this all along, had used her for his own twisted amusement. And now, Emily had to fight back. The doorbell rang, the sound cutting through the silence of Emily's apartment like a knife. She jumped, her heart skipping a beat, hope surging in her chest. Could it be the police? Could this finally be the moment when she got justice, when the nightmare was over? She rushed to the door, her breath shallow as she swung it open. Two uniformed officers stood there, their expressions serious as they glanced at their notes. The taller one, a woman with short, dark hair, stepped forward. "We're here about the incident at the restaurant," she said, her voice neutral but firm, as she flipped through a notepad. Emily's relief was short-lived. She quickly recounted the events of the date, how Kyle had filmed her without consent, how he'd manipulated the situation, and the disturbing discovery of the hidden camera. The officers listened intently, nodding along, their eyes steady and understanding. But as Emily finished, the taller officer exchanged a glance with her partner, and the weight of the unspoken words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. "Unfortunately," the officer began, her voice clipped, "without hard evidence, there's nothing we can do. It's just a viral video. No crime has been officially reported." The words landed with crushing finality. Emily's chest tightened, her breath catching. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead with them to understand, but the words wouldn't come. She was still processing what they had said, no crime. She had been manipulated, filmed without her consent, humiliated in front of thousands, but it didn't matter. Not without hard evidence. The officers gave her a sympathetic look, but it only made the sting worse. They turned and walked away, their footsteps fading as they disappeared down the hall. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. She had done everything right, she had reported it, she had confronted him, she had tried to make sense of the chaos, but now, it was as if everything she had worked for had amounted to nothing. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she instinctively checked it, hoping for some kind of relief, some kind of message that could make all of this right. But there was nothing. No message from Kyle. No explanation. The silence was deafening. She checked his social media accounts again, still inactive. His phone was turned off. It was as though he had vanished, leaving behind nothing but the aftermath of his actions. A sense of rising panic bubbled in her chest. Where had he gone? What was she supposed to do now? It wasn't just the police failing her, it was Kyle's complete disappearance. She had been abandoned. Left to pick up the shattered pieces of her dignity, alone. There was no one else to turn to, no one else who could understand the full extent of what she had gone through. And the worst part? She couldn't even tell if Kyle had planned this all along, or if he had simply discarded her when she had outlived her usefulness. Days passed in a blur of frustration and helplessness. The incident at the restaurant played over and over in her mind, the viral video continuing to haunt her. But then, something unexpected happened. Emily's obsession with the video deepened, a creeping sense that there was something more to it than she had initially realized. She watched it again, scrutinizing every frame, trying to make sense of the lingering feeling in her gut that she was missing something. And there it was. The ads. She hadn't noticed them at first, but now they were undeniable. Before the video played, there were advertisements, promotions running before her humiliation was broadcast to the world. Her stomach churned as she realized what this meant. The video wasn't just being passed around for fun. Someone was making money off of her pain. The account hosting the video wasn't just doing this for kicks, they were profiting from her suffering. Her fingers moved quickly as she took a screenshot of the monetized video. There was the glimmer of hope she had been waiting for. If she could show the police this, if she could prove that Kyle and whoever else was involved were making money from exploiting her, maybe they would take action. Maybe this would be enough to get the attention of someone who could help her. Emily's hands were shaking as she searched for more. The adrenaline surged in her veins, pushing her forward. She spent hours scouring Kyle's social media accounts, digging deeper than she ever had before. She found post after post, hidden camera pranks, unsuspecting women caught off guard, laughter in the comments. It wasn't just one video, it was a series, a pattern. Kyle wasn't the only one involved. There were others, friends, acquaintances, possibly even collaborators, all posting similar content. As she dug deeper, her stomach twisted with disgust. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This was a well-established pattern. Kyle had done this before. He had set women up for humiliation, for sport. Emily was just another name on a growing list of victims. The realization hit her like a hammer. This wasn't just a prank. This was part of something much bigger. And Kyle wasn't the only one involved. The following days were spent unraveling the web Kyle had woven. Emily scrolled through account after account, looking for any trace, any lead that could bring her closer to the truth. And then she found it. A message from one of Kyle's associates, someone named Jason. The conversation was chilling. Set up vulnerable women for pranks. Turn their personal lives into entertainment, the message read. Emily felt sick to her stomach. This wasn't just about Kyle. This was a network, an underground system of men who targeted women like her, turning them into entertainment for clicks and views. These men were preying on women's vulnerability, exploiting their personal moments for profit. The horror of what she had uncovered was almost too much to bear, but Emily couldn't turn back now. She couldn't stop. Her fingers trembled as she opened more accounts, piecing together the network. There were dozens of posts featuring women, some of them in humiliating situations, others confused or angry. The comments were filled with laughter and mockery, and the videos were racking up views and likes. The men behind these accounts were profiting off women's misery. They were turning their pain into a spectacle. Emily's determination grew with every new discovery. She wasn't just going to be another victim in this twisted game. She was going to expose them. She was going to take control of this narrative, no matter what it took. But even as the sense of purpose filled her, the overwhelming weight of what she had uncovered pressed down on her. This was bigger than Kyle. This was a system of exploitation, a dark underworld that thrived on the suffering of women. She was just one of many. The investigation led her to another piece of the puzzle, a conversation with Chad, one of the men tagged in the videos. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she messaged him, hoping for answers, desperate for any lead that could bring her closer to the truth. After a tense exchange, Chad agreed to meet. Emily arrived at the meeting place, her nerves frayed, hoping that this would be the breakthrough she needed. But when she saw him, all her hopes fell flat. Chad looked anxious, agitated. He wouldn't tell her anything useful. His answers were vague, his body language defensive. Emily pressed harder, demanding to know who else was involved, who was pulling the strings behind this operation. That's when Chad snapped. He grabbed her arm with surprising force, his face flushed with anger. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Emily's heart raced, and she stumbled back, the grip on her arm burning as if he had branded her. "Let go of me," she hissed, yanking her arm free, but Chad wasn't done. He shoved her again, harder this time. Emily stumbled, but she caught herself, fury flashing in her chest. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. With a forceful shove, she slapped his hand away and took a step back, her voice steady but fierce. "What is going on, Chad? Who are these people? What have you all been doing?" Chad's eyes flickered nervously. He looked ready to lash out again, but just as Emily braced herself, a bystander stepped in, causing Chad to storm off in frustration. Emily stood there, shaken but resolute. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The encounter with Chad only intensified Emily's resolve. She was getting closer to uncovering the truth. She wasn't just going to let them get away with this. She would expose this network. She would bring Kyle and the others to justice. And as the investigation deepened, the truth became clear: Kyle wasn't the mastermind. He was just a cog in a much larger machine, a network of men who had been systematically exploiting women for profit. She was just one piece in their twisted game. The horror of it all sank in as Emily realized the scale of the operation she was up against. But now, more than ever, she was determined to tear it down. The fight was far from over. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her phone in front of her. The screen glowed dimly in the low light, a constant reminder of her helplessness. She had checked it again, and each time, the comments grew worse. Each time she refreshed the page, she was bombarded with more mockery, more vitriol. The hate wasn't letting up. The insults weren't stopping. "You're crazy." She had it coming. "What a psycho." Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments, the words searing into her soul. Her heart sank with each hateful message, each cruel judgment passed by people who didn't know her, who didn't know what she had been through. The weight of the online harassment became unbearable, a crushing force that weighed heavily on her chest. She stared at the screen, her eyes unfocused, her mind drowning in despair. It was too much. She had no privacy left. Her life, her very essence, was being paraded for public entertainment. She considered closing her phone, walking away from it all, but a deeper, more resolute part of her refused to let go. She wasn't going to let them win. Not like this. But the pain, the humiliation, it felt endless. She had no idea how much more she could take. The longer she stayed locked in this spiral, the further she seemed to fall. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat, a thought flickering across her mind: could she walk away? Could she just disappear from this nightmare? But no. Something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to give Kyle the satisfaction of breaking her. This wasn't how her story ended. As Emily dug deeper into the responses, she uncovered something far more sinister than she'd anticipated. There were more videos, yes. Hundreds of them. The accounts that shared them were tagged with names she didn't recognize at first, but soon, they all started to connect. These accounts weren't just sharing videos for amusement. They were linked, one to the other, like a network of exploitation. Her humiliation wasn't an isolated incident. Kyle was just one cog in a much larger machine. Her stomach churned as she realized the scope of what she was up against. Kyle wasn't just a guy who liked to prank women for fun. No, he was a part of an operation. A system designed to exploit women like her. Her breath quickened as she traced through the digital breadcrumbs Kyle had left behind. There were other men, other women. This wasn't just a few isolated pranks, this was something far more systematic. There were others out there like her, caught in the same web of exploitation. And Kyle? He was one small part of it. A cog, yes, but this operation spanned far beyond him. It was almost too much to process. The realization hit her with the force of a punch to the gut. The videos weren't just about embarrassment, they were about profit. Women like Emily weren't just humiliated for sport, they were used to generate revenue. Her mind raced as she pieced together the growing puzzle, trying to make sense of the web of men and women involved. And then, the messages came flooding in. A direct message popped up on her phone. "You're a public disgrace." Emily felt her blood run cold. The message was explicit, cruel, filled with venom. She read the words again, but they didn't make sense. She didn't even know who had sent it. The words were personal, meant to hurt, meant to degrade. And they did. Her phone buzzed again. More notifications. More hateful comments. This time, though, it wasn't just the typical mockery, it was something else. Her personal information had been shared. Her address. Her phone number. Her private life was no longer hers. The weight of it all hit her in one devastating wave. The emotional toll felt suffocating. It was like the world was closing in on her, and for a moment, she wondered if she could breathe through it. Every notification was another slap in the face, every comment a reminder of how powerless she felt. It was too much. Her vision blurred for a second, and she closed her eyes, a wave of defeat washing over her. The humiliation, the fear, the helplessness, it was all too much to bear. How much more could she withstand before she completely broke? But then, something inside her refused to give up. She was tired of feeling small. Tired of feeling like a victim. This wasn't how the story ended. Not for her. Taking a deep breath, Emily pulled herself together. She grabbed her phone with renewed determination. It wasn't over. She was going to fight back. She couldn't stop the wave of harassment, but she could fight against it. She could expose the truth, bring the entire network to light. Her hands steadied as she dialed the police again. This time, she had more to offer. This time, she wasn't just reporting what had happened. She was ready to take control. She shared everything she had learned, the connections she had uncovered, the online network that Kyle was part of. She wasn't just a victim now, she was a fighter. Emily wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next few days were a blur of research and relentless investigation. Emily dug through Kyle's social media activity, his digital trail, the forums he had visited, everything she could get her hands on. The hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and frustration, but with each new clue, she got closer to the truth. It was a slow process, but she felt a surge of purpose with each piece of information she uncovered. Each clue was another step toward exposing the entire network. This wasn't just about Kyle anymore. This was about something bigger. A coordinated effort to exploit women for their own amusement and profit. And Emily was determined to tear it down. The police were working with her, following the digital trail she had uncovered, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. She needed more. More information. More connections. More evidence. She worked tirelessly, each new discovery building on the last. And then, one breakthrough moment changed everything. She found a message from Jason, one of Kyle's associates. The message was chilling. It talked about setting up vulnerable women for pranks, exploiting their personal lives, and turning them into entertainment. The message was proof of the system Emily had uncovered. This wasn't just about Kyle. This was a coordinated network of men working together, exploiting women for profit. Her stomach churned as the realization hit her. This wasn't a few bad actors. This was an organized effort to manipulate, humiliate, and degrade women for clicks and likes. But it wasn't over. Emily wasn't going to let them get away with it. She was going to expose this network, bring the truth to light, and take back control of her story. With the help of the police, she reached out to Sarah Mitchell, a well-known investigative journalist. Sarah's work focused on online exploitation and harassment, and Emily knew she was the perfect person to help. When they met, Sarah quickly recognized the scope of the operation. She promised to help Emily expose the network, to give the story the attention it deserved. Together, they gathered the evidence, documenting everything. They prepared a story that would change everything. When the story went live, it exploded. The media coverage was immediate and intense. The details of the underground network, the men involved, and the women they had exploited were laid bare for the world to see. Sarah's investigative piece uncovered the identities of several of the men involved, including Kyle. The public outrage was palpable, and more victims began to come forward. Emily felt a surge of pride and relief. The truth was out, and the floodgates had opened. Within hours, the police launched coordinated raids. Kyle was arrested. The others followed soon after. Emily watched the footage on the news, her heart pounding as the arrests were broadcast across the nation. The justice she had longed for was finally here, but it felt surreal. Kyle's smug face, the one she had seen on their first date, was gone, replaced with the cold reality of his actions. And yet, even as the arrests were made, Emily knew that the emotional scars of everything that had happened would linger. The public humiliation, the threats, the shame, it would never fully go away. But today, justice was served. And that felt like victory. But as Emily processed the emotional aftermath of everything she had endured, a message popped up on her phone from Rachel, another victim of the same network. Rachel thanked Emily for helping expose the operation and offered her support. For the first time in months, Emily smiled. She wasn't alone. Together, they would continue the fight. And as Emily sat in her living room, reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized that this was just the beginning. She had taken back control, not only of her own story but of something much bigger. The fight for justice had just begun, and she would be a part of it. The worst part? Emily said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. I never even saw it coming. But now they'll see us coming. And with that, Emily knew her journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.